number of deaths here in the United States has just crossed 100,000.
Protests over the death of George Floyd while in police custody now in their 8th night.
This is a Republican Party in deep trouble.
Our greatest days lie ahead.
It is an incredibly grim scene in the United States these days, isn't it? And with the election just 5 months away, a lot of people are asking if this is the beginning of the end for President Donald Trump. If you're in the United States right now, whichever news channel you put on, you're either confronted with the pandemic, which has killed over 100,000 Americans, or you're watching cities burn following the killing of a black man by a white police officer. Many of those channels are highly critical of President Trump's response to both crises. And as always, he fights back with Twitter. With over 80 million followers, he's able to bypass hostile news channels and reach Americans directly. But things are changing. Twitter started censoring Trump's tweets late last month for the first time. With an election coming up, Trump is in a hurry to make sure Twitter can't interfere with his most powerful form of direct communication. This is becoming a crucial legal battle, one that will embroil not just Twitter, but also Google, YouTube, Facebook, and possibly others. And if you care about free speech and the election coming up in November, it is a legal battle you will want to be watching.
One of the worst public health disasters of the last 100 years.
100,000 lives lost in the United States.
Unemployment could spike to 31% in this country.
Violent protests raged for a second straight night following the death of George Floyd.
Dozens of U.S. cities are in chaos.
President Trump tweeting his reaction to those protests overnight. Twitter then flagging his comments, saying the tweet violated rules about glorifying violence.
The president says, quote, "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd. When the looting starts, the shooting starts."
It is a tweet that is setting off a firestorm of controversies.
The situation has now grown chaotic, 1 block away from the White House.
Twitter hid that tweet, saying the president's comments violated its rules on glorifying violence.
Of course, this move by Twitter overnight, it's just the latest salvo in all of this. The president signed that executive order targeting social media companies yesterday after Twitter had put those fact-check labels on his tweets earlier this week.
Those tweets claimed without any evidence that mail-in voting leads to fraud.
What they choose to fact-check and what they choose to ignore or even promote is nothing more than a political activism. Currently, social media giants like Twitter receive an unprecedented liability shield based on the theory that they're a neutral platform, which they are not. Social media companies that engage in censoring or any political conduct will not be able to keep their liability shield. That's a big deal.
If he's so mad at Twitter, why doesn't he stop using it?
The president, I think, is unlikely to leave Twitter only because it's been a place where he has found a lot of political success.
Have you given any consideration to deleting your account?
Well, you know, if you weren't fake, I would not even think about it. I would do that in a heartbeat.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And because this is very much an important legal battle, we have invited 2 lawyers, Titus Nichols in Atlanta, Georgia, and Kelly Hyman in Denver, Colorado. They're both Democrats, but promise to keep their legal opinions straight down the line. And if they don't, well, that's why we have Rich Granville, a proud Republican and attended President Trump's White House Media Summit last year. Now, a quick question to all of you, and I'd like to start with you, Titus, if I may. Many people have been calling for President Trump's tweets to be censored for years. Why is Twitter acting now?
Twitter has faced a lot of criticism in refusing to censor these types of posts. And now with President Trump commenting without evidence to support it about the mail-in ballots leading to fraud, Twitter has now started to take a step forward. Previously, its owner has stated that they weren't going to do anything to regulate these posts. But however, with the rising swell of complaints and criticisms publicly against Twitter and Facebook, the organization is now taking a step against not blocking President Trump, but at least labeling it so that others know that what's being posted is not 100% factual.
Kelly, just a quick one from you as well about that. Why now?
You know, I think there needs to be some accountability for people's actions. I mean, it's horrific what Trump says in some of his tweets, and there's no basis for it. 2/3 of the Americans support voting by mail, and that's something we should really move forward. And so I think it's a first step to be some kind of accountability for Trump's actions. We have a president that's dividing our country, not uniting our country.
Rich Granville, why now?
First of all, everybody knows that mail-in ballots are a joke. It's not time to censor anyone. If you start censoring now, where does it end? And we're going to give Jack Dorsey, a known Satanist, the ability to censor everybody. I'm not buying it.
As you said, the first time is over mail-in ballots. He's concerned, let's have a look at the tweets, that it will lead to fraud and a rigged election. Titus, I have spoken to a couple of experts, and we have heard of fraud as a result of mail-in ballots, perhaps not massive or widespread, but it has happened. I just want to show you this clip here from NBC about what's happened in New Jersey last month.
Well, residents in Paterson, New Jersey say this week's city council election is looking like a total disaster. Allegations of vote stealing and ballot stuffing continue.
Paterson city ballots apparently found filled out and stuffed in a mail drop in an entirely different town. There's social media video of an apparent single voter casting many votes. When specifically asked about the Paterson fraud allegations, the governor said this.
I don't have any specific insights on Tuesday in Paterson. It's clearly something that we're looking at.
So Titus, bearing that little clip in mind and other studies, do you still think that mail-in ballots are, it was factually incorrect for him to say that?
The problem is the Trump administration lacks credibility whenever they make an allegation of voter fraud. Number one, you have the fact that there was a commission that the Trump administration tried to put together with Secretary of State Korbach that fell apart because they had no evidence of widespread voter fraud. Then you have the situation in North Carolina where the Republican Party was actually engaged in voter fraud, yet President Trump does not comment on that. So you can't say that his administration has credibility when they pick and choose what issues they want to address. As far as this allegation of widespread voter fraud, he has failed to present any evidence to show that it's true. It's just a part of the narrative that the administration puts forward.
Kelly, just a quick last question on this for you. Lawrence Douglas, a professor of law in Massachusetts who wrote Will He Go? Trump and the Looming Electoral Meltdown. He told us that Trump's actually against mail-in ballots because postal voters tend to be Democrat. It tantamount to voter suppression. I guess you'd take that point of view.
I wouldn't say it's Democrats, but I do believe that it's voter suppression. I believe that people's vote should count and every vote should matter, and they shouldn't suppress the votes. And I think that Trump is afraid if there's voting by mail that he will lose this election. We have to remember he did lose the popular vote in 2016. So I think he's concerned about that's why he doesn't want people to vote, and people should vote. People's vote matters. Get out there and vote, please.
Rich, quick question for you. We've got a really good example on Twitter of the Chinese foreign ministry spokesman. His tweet, which says that American military perhaps brought the coronavirus to Wuhan, that was kept up there for 2.5 months without being fact-checked. It was only fact-checked once the president's tweet was fact-checked, and then there was pressure the other way to get on top of the Chinese Communist Party. What does that tell you?
Huge double standard. I don't care what you feel about Trump. If we didn't have him right now, our country would be in a lot of trouble. Can you imagine Pelosi and Schiff running this country? I mean, those people are the lowest of low in my book. So at the end of the day, mail-in ballots typically, as that law professor was saying, he incorrectly stated that because most mail-in ballots come from the military, and the military supports Trump at a very, very high percentage.
Now, Twitter has censored President Trump on 2 occasions, of course. We've discussed the first, mail-in ballots. Let's have a look at the second one, which came 2 days later on May the 29th. After a night of violent protest in Minneapolis relating to the killing of a black man, George Floyd, by a white police officer days earlier, the president tweeted, "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen." Just spoke to Minnesota's governor, Tim Walz, and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty, and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Now, Twitter then covered that tweet and issued this rebuke to the president. which says it violated Twitter rules about glorifying violence. Titus, if I can come to you, do you think it did violate rules about glorifying violence? Do you think it violated the law, if there is one?
From a legal perspective, that's a murky subject, because while the president is the commander-in-chief of armed forces, you are seeing current reports coming out from Secretary of Defense Esper stating that he does not support the president invoking the Insurrection Act or deploying active duty forces against peaceful protesters. However, on the other hand, you have the fact that President Trump did not exactly say go out and shoot people. However, when you are the president of the United States, anytime you make a reference to anything that's violent or perceived as encouraging violence, it's going to be a big deal. So if it was just a random person saying it, I think it'd be in a totally different category. But when the president of the United States says that, people are going to take notice, and you have some people who might act on that.
Kelly, you mentioned in a discussion before the program that this is a reference, either knowingly or unknowingly, to something that happened in Miami. What were you talking about?
Yes, in the 1960s, the comment goes back to the Miami Times, to a police chief making that. And I believe that it was improper for our president to make such a statement. He is the president of the United States. He's not acting that way. And it's definitely time for change in our country. And that's why it's important for people to vote. The president should be making these comments. This is not right. We deserve better.
Rich, you've been around the president at the White House. You're also from Florida, so you know exactly the history to that saying. What do you make of it?
Yeah, so let's talk about Miami. You know why Miami didn't have any looting is because it's a stand-your-ground state, and people like myself that carry guns would shoot them. So if the president of the United States is calling a call to arms, it may have been more to the public, but at the end of the day, he wasn't inciting violence. There was no violence incited there. He was using his commander-in-chief authority to say, hey, if you guys don't stop this, I'm going to bring in the military. And as of today, I don't hear anyone talking about the Insurrection Act has been enacted. In fact, I think this whole situation is starting to simmer down a little bit. And again, this is Antifa, right? This is Antifa and far left-wing organizations that have caused most of these issues. This is not peaceful protesters, right? So let's make sure we distinguish between the two.
And I want to just interject in there briefly. You made reference to the reason why there aren't any looting in Miami is because of stand your ground. However, in the state of Georgia, part of the ongoing protest is in response to the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot and killed by two individuals who had no legal authority to chase after him, but they took it upon themselves to grab shotguns and chase after him because they thought that he might have been involved in a crime. So the idea that completely foolish, standing your ground is going to limit violence is already proven to be false, because it is that type of rogue element that is leading to the groundswell of protests you're seeing throughout the country.
I don't think that's accurate. In fact, there's plenty of videos online showing that protesters walking by people with guns standing in front of their businesses, and they just walked on by. So don't tell me that not having guns or having guns in a position to defend a property, defend life, or defend liberty has anything, because that is the basis of our country. Our country stands on it, and it will never change.
Titus, I just want to come in with a quick question for you. A Republican lawyer I spoke to before this program said there is a difference between glorifying violence and inciting violence. Inciting violence, of course, is illegal. And he also went on to say that if Twitter was so concerned about anyone glorifying violence, it would take 100 years to comb through the sorts of tweets that you have on there that glorify violence. Why do you think it has been so tolerant of others over the years posting tweets that glorify violence, but have come down now on Trump?
Because those other people who post something don't have the authority to send out the military. Whereas we've saw as to what President Trump was willing to do in D.C., simply to have a photo op, he deployed the military and the federal park police. So while you have other people who do need to be equally regulated so that they don't glorify violence, it's apples and oranges to compare someone else to the bully pulpit that Trump has.
Titus, let me tell you what the President of the United States did. President of the United States regained the ground. And then he went out there, and the photo op, people may say it was a photo op, but what he did was he let America know that this ground belongs to everyone and not a bunch of protesters that were defacing the monuments of our country that have been there for 100, 150, 200 years, right? And going out and doing that, the president was showing a show of force, and also that every single protester that they don't want to talk on other news networks was being told that the curfew was coming up and they were going to start opening up the area, and they let everybody know. So this CNN, MSNBC narrative that the president just went out there and started bashing and moving people out of the way without warning is complete hogwash.
Okay, let me bring in Mark Zuckerberg's comments, if I may. We're running out of time, so we need to push on. Mark Zuckerberg was rather hesitant to censor President Trump on this particular looting, shooting tweet. He was concerned that actually it's a bit ambiguous. It may have been a warning for people's benefit. You can still see the president's identical message on Facebook. Just the day before, Zuckerberg said it was not Facebook's or any other social media company's place to be the arbiter of truth. I mean, that's not to say that Facebook doesn't censor. It does, of course. And just last month, it set up a so-called independent oversight board to have the final say on what should and should not be censored. Now, they're said to be a highly respected, diverse group of individuals, but we found they weren't that diverse when it came to President Trump.
When Facebook announced the first 20 members of its new oversight board last month, liberal newspapers called it a new era of social media governance, made up of an international panel of free expression advocates. At first glance, a diverse bunch, but it soon becomes apparent many of them have pretty much the same view of President Trump. Law professor Pam Karlan, described by the New York Times as a full-throated, unapologetic liberal, offered hostile testimony in the president's impeachment trial.
Give you one example that shows you the difference between him and a king, which is the Constitution says there can be no titles of nobility. So while the president can name his son Baron, he can't make him a baron.
Fellow board member and journalist Alan Rusbridger supports taking President Trump's live coronavirus briefings off the air, accusing him of spreading disinformation. Then there's lawyer and human rights activist Mina Kiai, who thinks Trump's a fascist hero.
In my view, I think that Donald Trump, in fact, is the jewel in the crown of the far-right, fascist, xenophobic, right-wing groups that exist.
Another board member, actually one of the four co-chairs, law professor Jamal Green, tweeted that believing Donald Trump is an odious person who should be nowhere near the presidency is consistent with mental clarity and good judgment rather than with bias. And yet another lawyer and internet activist, Nigat Dad, tweets, "The world needs to build a wall around you and Trump and never let you come out."
So, Rich Granville, let me come to you first. We've seen the kinds of people who are on the oversight board. What do you make of it?
Yeah, they're leftists. They have like authority to do whatever they want. If you're going to have someone censoring or having on a board deciding what's real and what's not, then it needs to be a factually done, and it needs to be done with at least cursory discovery to understand the basis of truth or not in a statement.
Rich, you have a small clue as to your political affiliation over your shoulder there. Does it concern you, the composition of Facebook's oversight board, does it concern you for the election coming up in November?
I think it does, and I think we have to go back to 2016 and look what happened there. I mean, conservative voices were silenced. Thousands of major news outlets that they considered deemed unworthy of news, they were putting out stuff on Hillary Clinton that turned out to be true. I mean, at the end of the day, like if you're going to start censoring one, then you're going to have to censor all. That leads us down a very dark road for this country, because this country is based on free speech, and we have to maintain that, even if the speech is unkind. That's what it has to be.
Kelly, can you understand when people look at the composition of the board that some people, perhaps half the country, are going to be concerned?
Well, I think we also have to think about that there needs to be some accountability. And I don't consider it censorship, because his posts are still up there. They're just putting something on there for people to get more facts about about voting and stuff like that. So I wouldn't consider it censorship, because we all have a First Amendment right, free speech in the U.S. Absolutely. But there needs to be some kind of accountability.
You say that the tweet has been left up there, but if you look at which news organizations they're referring you to, you're talking about his arch rivals, aren't you? You're talking about CNN, You're talking about New York Times, and they have a very troubled relationship.
But there still needs to be some accountability for statements and stuff like that. I mean, there was comments made about people that haven't been taken down about Scarborough and those, and the wife went on and said, please don't take please take those down. It's not true about what happened. But there needs to be some accountability for people's actions, and so I don't consider it censorship.
And let's also
Is accountability, Matthew, suing them for libel? I mean, if there is accountability, it's called the judicial system. I mean, you guys are lawyers, right?
And you also have to remember that any difficulty that Trump has with New York Times and CNN is in large part because of his repeated attacks against those entities anytime they report a story that he doesn't agree with. Not a story that's false, but just a story he doesn't agree with. And in going back to Rich's point of the country is going down a path of not having freedom of speech, you're seeing that when you see the president issue executive orders that curtail a private entity's ability to exercise freedom of speech.
Titus, thank you. And you bring us to the final issue of the show. Let me just introduce it to the viewer first. Hang on a second. Okay. Now, as we mentioned, and Titus has mentioned, President Trump has issued an executive order, and that is his way of disciplining, if you like, the big social media giant. Let's have a listen to the president himself.
Today I'm signing an executive order to protect and uphold the free speech and rights of the American people. Currently, social media giants like Twitter receive an unprecedented liability shield based on the theory that they're a neutral platform, which they are not. Social media companies that engage in censoring or any political conduct will not be able to keep their liability shield. That's a big deal. They have a shield. They can do what they want. They have a shield. They're not going to have that shield. We're fed up with it, and it's unfair, and it's been very unfair.
Now, Rich, what is the main aim of President Trump's executive order?
Okay, so the Communication Decency Act, what they call 230, is a piece of legislation that was put in place so that to protect the UGC, so user-generated content, social media, YouTube type of websites, so that they can't be sued for liable for things that people say, like saying Joe Biden is a pedophile, right? So they can't be sued for that, right? But they can actually have the content being put out on their websites. So what President Trump is trying to do here is to limit that. And when you start censoring and or start paying publishers for content, then the liability then begins to twist back to the site owner. And what we have to do is if it's going to be a free speech platform, if it's going to be considered like a utility, right, then what has to happen is it has to be a free playing field. I don't think this is really going to happen in the long scheme. I think there might be some changes in the law, but I don't think it's going to be repealed, because what it will cause is a major problem for these companies itself, because then they would have to police every single post that goes up because they'll be liable for them. And if that's the case, then the social media itself would cease to be instant, right, as it is today, which would change the way everything is done through these social media platforms and require a lot more employees and would heavily damage their profits.
Titus, the president says that he's issued this executive order to fight for free speech, but a lot of commentators, including yourself, think it's actually going to have the opposite effect.
It's going to have, it's an unintended consequence that he has not thought out. Because if this liability and protection under Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act is taken away, that means, as Rich said, Twitter and Facebook will have to crack down on people who post false information, such as Pizzagate and such as other random right-wing conspiracies. You're going to see the social media networks crack down on them. And so it's going to be those who support those types of Clinton-esque or Biden's a pedophile types of conspiracy theories that they're going to be on the short end of the stick, because we all know there's no evidence to support these crazy conspiracy theories that are created. So while the president is stating that he's doing it in favor of free speech, he's doing it as a way to strike back against Twitter, because they're not allowing him to post whatever he wants in any type of fashion.
Kelly, final question for you. There are lawsuits already. The lawyers never waste a moment, do they, against this executive order. What do you think is going to happen? How is this going to play out?
Ultimately, it'll be up to the court to make a determination in regards to it as well. But I really don't think anything is going to happen. I do have to agree with the points I made. I think that Trump's executive order is going to hurt Trump. I mean, if the fact that Twitter have to, in fact, police his comments, then I think that's going to be a huge problem for him. So ultimately, I don't think that he wants that to happen because he's allowed to say whatever he wants on Twitter based on free speech, and there's no accountability for his actions. Hopefully, in 2020 at the polls, that there'll be some accountability. People will get out and vote, and we'll have a new president in place.
Okay, well, that's all we have time for. Rich Granville, Titus Nichols, and Kelly Hyman. Thank you all very much for your contributions to the Nexus, and thank you at home for watching. Remember, you can see this episode and all our previous episodes on our channel on YouTube. Until next week, then, goodbye. Well, thanks for watching our program. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, and even subscribe.